the other stories tonight. As Polly was saying, there are reports that a Russian missile, or at least a missile, has landed in Poland near the Ukraine border and has apparently killed a couple of people, according to Polish firemen. They're certainly taking it seriously among Polish politicians. Let's go to Colonel Richard Kemp, CBE, who had a distinguished career with the British Army in Afghanistan and elsewhere. What do you make of these reports, Richard?
Well, it's obviously hard to know what to make of them, but I guess it appears that the missile or missiles that hit Poland were fired at the same time as a barrage of rockets fired by Russia into Lvov nearby, near the Polish border. And my guess, without too many facts, would be that this was an accidental attack on Poland by these Russian missiles. Missiles tend to do, even the most sophisticated missiles, bombs, etc., tend to do the most unexpected things, and I would imagine it's unlikely Russia would have deliberately sent missiles into Poland, so it looks most likely to have been an accidental attack.
Is that really the case, though? I mean, we understand when Kim Jong-un looses off a couple of nukes that they clear the perimeter fence and then can go in all kinds of directions because he's not very good at it. Are you saying that the same thing would apply to Russian missile? Because this is a village 4 miles from the border. It's actually possible to accidentally overshoot that much.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it happens not infrequently. When the Russians fired something like 100 missiles into Ukraine today, it was, I think, the largest or one of the largest bombardments they've launched since the war began. And to be honest, it doesn't surprise me that one would have gone, or maybe more than one would have gone astray, and even by such a large margin of that. Russian missiles, whether it's Russian or American or British missiles, they're not 100% reliable. They're pretty reliable, but they can go wrong. And I think this probably is what we're here. It doesn't seem, no other explanation seems logical. It doesn't make any sense for the Russians just to fire a missile into Ukrainian farmland for without any other action taking place.
Well, there is one reason, isn't there? It's a psychological reason rather than a strategic one. But they've just lost their principal acquisition since this war began, which is the town of Kherson. And the thinking might well be that you need to do something to show you're still in the game. And if this is all you have to hand, this is what you do. I mean, it is odd that the war is going well for Ukraine militarily on the ground, and yet we saw with the pipeline explosions in the Baltic and now this development that there's weird kind of attempts at expanding the war that are always going on.
Yeah, it's a possibility, of course, but it's not it's not really what actually happened as far as we understand. It isn't particularly logical, even in that context. I know that you can't sort of necessarily attribute the most clear logic to President Putin and his people, but that is a possibility. But I think it's not very likely. I think there would be other more effective forms of attack they could carry out if they specifically wanted to attack Poland and maybe draw Poland even further into the conflict than they are. They're already heavily involved. They've provided massive amount of support to Ukraine in very many different ways. But it doesn't look like, to me, I mean, it could be wrong. It doesn't look like a deliberate attack against Poland. And people who are saying, I've heard many people saying this evening that this means NATO is at war with Russia. It doesn't actually mean that. If it was believed by Poland or the US, NATO, that this was a deliberate attack on Poland, then yes, it could. There might be a need for some form of NATO retaliation. But if it was in fact accidental, then it doesn't invoke NATO Article 5, doesn't constitute a deliberate attack against a NATO member.
So just to be clear on that point, because that's most non-Ukrainians' principal and non-Poles' principal interest in it, this idea that there's an automatic invocation of Article 5 and suddenly we're in World War III with Russia. As long as everyone agrees this was accidental, it's just one of those things.
That's correct. I think so. And it doesn't happen infrequently where one country will carry out, let's say, we've had occasions when airplanes have been shot down, and that hasn't led to war because it's been done by accident in some cases. It's a blurred issue, but I think if for example Poland wanted to go to war with Russia and wanted NATO to go with Russia, then Poland perhaps could make a case on the basis of this for doing so. I don't think they're very likely to do that, and I don't think NATO is going to go along with it either, because it's not really in either Poland's or NATO's interests to be at war with Russia now. Russia is they're not necessarily completely lost the war, but they're certainly not making good progress in the war. They're on the back foot at the moment. I don't think there's a motivation for NATO to use this as a justification to initiate direct hostilities.